They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but sometimes it is served in silence, or with the bitter taste of regret, or in the phantom sound only one person can hear. Tonight, 5 chilling tales where the punishment perfectly, terrifyingly fits the crime. If you're ready to see justice find its own eerie design, show your support with a like and subscribe for more. Art, in its purest form, is more than just paint on a surface. It is a piece of the artist's soul, a vibrant echo of their passion and perspective left behind for the world to see. And when such a heartfelt creation is carelessly, cruelly erased, that echo does not always fade into silence. Sometimes, it finds a new canvas upon which to leave its indelible, haunting mark. In the neglected heart of our city, on the side of a forgotten brick warehouse, there once was a masterpiece. It wasn't framed in a gallery, nor was it commissioned for a grand fee. It was the work of a young, gifted graffiti artist, known only as Fable. He was a quiet, unassuming young man by day, but by night, with cans of spray paint, he brought forgotten walls to life. His mural on the old warehouse was his magnum opus, a sprawling, breathtaking scene of mythical creatures not fighting, but coexisting, their forms woven from starlight and intricate patterns. It was a beacon of beauty in a landscape of urban decay, a free gift to the city, cherished by the few who passed it on their daily commute. Then, the building was sold. The new owner was a developer named Marcus Thorne, a man who saw the city not as a community, but as a portfolio of assets to be sanitized and sold. He saw Fable's mural not as art, but as an unsightly defacement, an impediment to the sterile, gray, minimalist aesthetic he planned for the refurbished property. He gave the order without a second thought. One dreary morning, a work crew arrived, and by noon, the vibrant, star-woven creatures were gone, buried under a thick, oppressive coat of battleship gray paint. A local blogger who had championed Fable's work managed to catch him that evening, standing across the street, staring at the blank, soul-crushing wall. He didn't look angry, just empty, as if a part of him had been painted over along with his art. He never created another piece in the city after that day. He simply vanished. Another whisper of talent lost to the relentless march of development. Thorne's project moved forward. The warehouse was converted into sleek, expensive loft apartments. The gray walls were a perfect, minimalist backdrop for the affluent tenants he sought. For a few weeks, all was well. Then the first report came. A new tenant, a young graphic designer, called Thorne's office in a state of confusion. A strange, intricate pattern, like a swirl of stardust, had appeared overnight on the interior of her main living room window. It was beautiful, she admitted, but it couldn't be scrubbed off from either the inside or the outside. It seemed to be within the glass itself. Thorne dismissed it as a manufacturing flaw in the window. But then, a second call came. An accountant on the floor below reported a faint but undeniably present image of a creature's ethereal feathered wing appearing on the polished concrete of his floor, as if a ghost had been painted there with moonlight. It, too, was indelible. Panic began to set in when the calls became a flood. Throughout the building, Fable's art was re-emerging. This was not vandalism. The art appeared in impossible places, on impossible surfaces. A creature's gentle, knowing eye would appear on the inside of a locked glass shower door. The delicate, spiraling horn of a mythical beast would be etched onto a stainless steel refrigerator. The patterns weren't random. They were pieces, fragments of the original, obliterated mural, each one appearing with a ghostly, luminous quality. Thorne hired the most expensive industrial cleaning crews. Their powerful solvents and abrasive tools were useless against the spectral graffiti. The art remained, shimmering faintly, a quiet, beautiful, and deeply unnerving testament. The tenants, initially intrigued, grew unnerved. Living in the sterile lofts now felt like living inside someone else's persistent, sorrowful dream. They began to break their leases, fleeing the beautiful, inexplicable art that was slowly reclaiming the building. Thorne's nightmare, however, had just begun. The revenge followed him. One morning, he awoke to find a faint, silvery outline of one of Fable's creatures on the mirror of his own luxury penthouse bathroom, miles away from the warehouse. He smashed the mirror in a fit of rage, but the next day, the image was on his car's windshield, etched into the glass as if by frost on a summer morning. The haunting was not loud, it was not violent, but it was absolute. Thorne became a pariah. His sterile gray developments, once his pride, were now canvases for a ghost. The story spread, a modern urban legend. His reputation was ruined, his projects shunned. He was defeated not by a market downturn or a rival developer, but by an artist's unbreakable will, by the quiet, pervasive, and beautiful revenge of his art. Fable's spirit, or perhaps just the sheer force of his passion and the injustice of its erasure, had imbued his creation with a life of its own. It refused to be silenced, refused to be buried under a coat of indifferent gray paint. It simply found new canvases, leaving its mark not as an act of destruction, but as a quiet, constant, and inescapable reminder that you can paint over art, but you can never truly erase the soul of its creator. In the age of sale, a shipwright's reputation was his most valuable currency, earned through decades of skill, precision, and an unspoken understanding with the timber and the sea. A man's soul, it was said, was built into the keel of every vessel he launched. But when such a legacy is deliberately scuttled by envy, the sea itself can become a vessel for justice, and a ship's ghost might not be the spirit of one who died aboard it, but of the one who gave it life. Master Gideon was a shipwright of the old school. His hands, though gnarled with age, could read the grain of oak like a page from a book, and he believed a ship was a living thing, born of a sacred pact between craftsman and nature. His final crowning achievement was to be a magnificent two-masted schooner he named the Albatross. Her lines were elegant, her craftsmanship flawless. She was, Gideon declared, the most honest ship he had ever built, the culmination of his life's work. Watching from the shadows of a neighboring dry dock was Caleb Fletcher. Fletcher was a younger, ambitious shipwright who built with modern shortcuts and viewed Gideon's traditional methods with a resentful eye. He saw the acclaim being showered upon the Albatross and was consumed by a bitter, corrosive jealousy. He saw Gideon's masterpiece not as a thing of beauty, but as an obstacle to his own ascent. Days before the schooner's launch, Fletcher enacted his silent, treacherous plan. Under the cover of a moonless night, he snuck aboard the near-finished Albatross. He did not set a fire or bore a hole in the hull. His sabotage was far more insidious. He made his way to the mainmast step, the crucial socket in the keel that supports the entire mast. With specialized tools, he subtly altered the fitting, creating a hidden weakness, a flaw so deep within the ship's bones that no surface inspection would ever find it. It would not cause the ship to founder, not immediately. It was designed only to fail under the specific, immense pressure of a full sail in a strong wind, ensuring a crippling but not catastrophic disgrace. The Albatross's maiden voyage was a grand affair. A wealthy merchant had chartered her for a lucrative journey, and the whole port turned out to see Gideon's masterpiece set sail. She was magnificent on the water, catching the wind with a grace that brought tears to the old shipwright's eyes. For 2 days, she sailed perfectly. Then, on the 3rd day, a strong gale blew in. As the sails filled and the immense pressure bore down on the main mast, Fletcher's hidden flaw revealed itself. A sickening crack echoed from deep within the ship's structure. The great mast didn't fall, but it shifted, its integrity compromised, crippling the schooner's ability to sail effectively. The Albatross, her pride broken, was forced to limp back to port. Gideon's perfect record was shattered. Whispers turned to accusations. In his old age, they said, he must have cut corners, his skills finally failing him. The merchant withdrew his charter, and Gideon's reputation, once as solid as the oak he worked, disintegrated. Heartbroken and publicly shamed by a failure he could not comprehend, the old shipwright spirit gave out. He passed away a few months later, his final masterpiece resting in port like a monument to his supposed incompetence. Caleb Fletcher, publicly offering crocodile tears and feigned sympathy, used the opportunity to acquire the flawed Albatross for a fraction of its true worth. His plan was simple. He would perform a grand public repair of the mast, claim to have found and fixed Gideon's error, and relaunch the ship as a testament to his own superior modern methods. He made the repairs, reinforcing the mast step with steel, and rechristened the ship the Fletcher's Triumph. He gathered a new crew and, with a smug sense of victory, set sail on his own maiden voyage. The ship performed beautifully as it left the harbor. But once the coastline had vanished from the horizon, a strange, unnatural fog began to roll in, thick and silent, blanketing the sea and isolating the ship in a featureless, gray world. The sky had been clear moments before, Within the disorienting fog, the ship began to change. The compass on the binnacle, once steady, began to spin wildly, its needle a frantic, useless blur. Then came the sounds. A faint, rhythmic tap, tap, tapping, like a lone hammer striking a wooden hull, echoing from the empty cargo hold below. A soft, mournful shh of a handsaw cutting through timber, a sound with no earthly source. They were the ghost sounds of Master Gideon at work. A low, sorrowful moan seemed to catch in the rigging, a wind that whispered of injustice. The crew grew deeply unnerved. Fletcher, trying to maintain control, cursed the fog and the strange acoustics of the sea. But on the second day, trapped in the same impenetrable mist, the sounds grew more distinct. The whispering in the rigging began to sound like a name, a long, drawn-out Gideon, over and over. Terrified, unable to navigate or escape the fog, Fletcher had no choice but to wait. After 3 full days, the fog lifted as suddenly as it had arrived, revealing they had made no progress at all. In fact, the currents had turned them back. The faint, familiar shape of their home port was visible on the horizon. Every subsequent attempt to sail the ship ended in the same maddening failure. As soon as land was lost, the unnatural fog would descend. The compass would spin. The ghost of Gideon's work would echo through the hull. And after days of being trapped in a sensory limbo, they would find themselves turned back, having made no headway. The Albatross, so perfect in the harbor, simply refused to grant Fletcher the rewards of his treachery. It would not sail for him. Fletcher's crew, spooked by the ship's undeniable haunting, deserted him. His business plans crumbled. He was trapped with his beautiful, magnificent prize, a ship that served as a constant public reminder of his failure. He couldn't sail it, and with its new ghostly reputation, he couldn't sell it. Master Gideon's revenge was a quiet, seafaring masterpiece. His spirit didn't seek to drag the ship to the depths or enact a violent end upon his rival. Instead, it reclaimed his creation. It allowed the ship to remain a perfect vessel, a testament to his skill for all to see in port. But it denied Fletcher the one thing he had committed his crime for: a successful voyage. The Albatross, the ship Gideon had built with his soul, became Fletcher's gilded prison. Its phantom fog and ghostly work sounds the inescapable bars of a cage built from his own deceit. Retribution does not always need a voice to announce its arrival. Sometimes the most profound forms of justice are delivered in absolute, unnerving silence, a punishment perfectly tailored to the nature of the transgression. In our bustling town square for years, there was a quiet, unassuming fixture of artistry and peace. And it was there that a group of thoughtless youths learned a chilling lesson: that you should never, ever steal a silent man's voice. His name, if he had one that he shared, was unknown to most. We all just called him Antoine, the mime. He wasn't the comical, silly type who pretended to be trapped in a box for laughs. His was a more poignant, classical art form, Dressed in simple black with a stark white face, he would tell silent, heartbreaking stories with his graceful movements, tales of love and loss, of hope found and then misplaced, of the quiet struggles of the human heart. He was a master of his craft, his performances drawing small, appreciative crowds who understood the beauty in his silence. But his quiet artistry also made him a target for Kyle and his friends. They were a pack of loud, arrogant teenagers who moved through the world with an unearned sense of superiority. To them, Antoine's deliberate silence was not an art form, but a weakness, a vacuum to be filled with their own jeers and mockery. They would interrupt his performances with loud shouts, mimic his graceful gestures with crude, exaggerated motions, and toss loose change at his feet instead of into the small, felt-lined box he set out for donations. Antoine never reacted. He would simply hold his pose until they grew bored and moved on, his painted-on expression of sorrow seeming, in those moments, heartbreakingly real. One Saturday afternoon, their casual cruelty escalated. It wasn't enough to mock him anymore. As Antoine performed a particularly delicate routine about catching a fragile, invisible butterfly, Kyle, on a dare from his friends, strode forward, accidentally kicked over Antoine's donation box, sending the modest collection of coins skittering across the cobblestones. As Antoine stooped to collect them, another boy deliberately stomped on Antoine's simple, stark white mask, which he had placed carefully to the side, cracking it down the middle. They howled with laughter at the sight of the quiet man kneeling amidst the scattered coins and his one broken prop. This time, something was different. Antoine slowly stood up, ignoring the coins. He looked not at his broken mask, but directly at Kyle, his eyes holding a new, unnerving intensity. He then began one final, deliberate performance, directed only at them. He raised his hands to his mouth and mimed pulling a long, invisible thread from between his lips. He stretched it taut between his fingers, a silent, imaginary strand of connection. Then, with a sharp, dramatic motion, he mimed snipping the thread with a pair of invisible scissors. He let his hands fall to his sides. He gave the group a small, sad, and deeply final bow, then turned and walked away from the town square. He was never seen performing there again. Kyle and his friends thought it was hilarious. Another victory. The next day in school, Kyle was back to his old self. In history class, the teacher, Mr. Harrison, asked him a direct question about the Peloponnesian War. Kyle leaned back in his chair, a smug, smart-aleck answer ready on his lips. He opened his mouth to speak. Nothing came out. Not a whisper, not a stutter, just absolute, dead silence. He tried again, pushing, feeling a strange, constricting pressure in his throat. Still nothing. He could breathe, he could think, but the connection between his brain and his voice was severed. He could only gesture helplessly with his hands, a look of rising panic on his face, to the confusion of his teacher and the growing snickers of his classmates, the same kind of snickers he had so often directed at others. The moment of panic passed, the teacher moved on, and a few minutes later, Kyle found his voice had returned. He dismissed it as a bizarre, momentary fluke. But it wasn't a fluke. The affliction returned, but only at moments of social or emotional importance. He tried to ask a girl he liked to the upcoming dance. As he approached her, the words caught in his throat, leaving him in an awkward, silent tableau, his confidence evaporating. He got into a heated argument with his parents over his grades. When he went to make his crucial defiant point, he became mute, his hands flying in frantic, useless gestures while their frustration with him mounted. His power had always been in his voice, his quick wit, his ability to cut others down with a well-aimed phrase. Now that power was gone when he needed it most. He was being forced to experience the world as Antoine had, trapped in a silent, invisible box of his own making, unable to speak, forced to communicate through gestures, often misunderstood, and increasingly mocked. His friends, who had laughed with him at Antoine, now laughed at him, at his sudden, inexplicable silences. They soon grew tired of his new, quiet awkwardness and began to drift away. The horrifying realization came to him one evening, weeks into his torment. He was watching a documentary about performance art, and he saw an artist perform a gesture almost identical to the one Antoine had made that final day in the square, miming the pulling and snipping of a thread. The narrator explained it as an ancient symbol for severing a connection, for taking away a voice. Kyle felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He understood then. This wasn't a physical ailment. This was a curse, a quiet, elegant, and perfectly tailored revenge. The justice of it was as inescapable as it was ironic. Antoine, the silent man, hadn't needed a loud curse or a violent confrontation. He had used the only tool he had, his art, his silence, to inflict upon his tormentor the very powerlessness Kyle had so gleefully celebrated. He had simply taken Kyle's voice, not permanently, but at every moment it truly mattered, leaving him to live in his own state of frustrating, impotent silence. Kyle tried to find the mime, to apologize, to beg for the curse to be lifted, but Antoine had vanished as completely as the sound from Kyle's own lips. He was left alone, a king of corridors now ruling over a silent, invisible prison of his own making, a living testament to a mime's final, quiet, and deeply resonant bow. Some acts of vengeance are not delivered by a spirit, but through a spirit, the spirit of a place, a unique voice that only one person truly understood. When that person is cast aside, the silence they leave behind can be filled by something far more unsettling, a resonant and deeply unnerving form of justice. For over 30 years, the soul of the historic Orpheum Grand Theater wasn't its gilded proscenium or its velvet seats, but its sound. And the keeper of that sound was Arthur Vance. He was the theater's head sound engineer, a master of an almost forgotten art. To Arthur, sound wasn't just about volume. It was about atmosphere, texture, and feeling. He worked not with sleek digital interfaces, but with old analog consoles, his fingers dancing across a sea of knobs and faders, listening with an intimacy that bordered on communion. He knew the Orpheum's voice better than anyone, and he knew its secret. The Orpheum Grand had a hum. It wasn't an electrical buzz or a flaw in the wiring. It was a strange, inherent, resonant frequency, a very low, almost subsonic thrum that was part of the building's very structure. Arthur had discovered it decades ago. He found that if this hum was allowed to bleed into the house audio, even at levels too low to be consciously heard, it had a profoundly unsettling effect on an audience. It induced a low-grade, irrational anxiety, a sense of creeping dread that made people feel tense and unwell without knowing why. For 30 years, Arthur's greatest unseen skill was meticulously filtering out this Orpheum hum, neutralizing its oppressive voice so that the true art on stage could shine. Then came Ms. Anya Davies. She was the Orpheum's new manager, a woman with a sharp business suit and a sharper disdain for anything she considered obsolete. She saw Arthur's analog methods as ancient and inefficient, a relic to be purged in favor of a new, fully digital, high-impact sound system. She dismissed his quiet warnings about the theater's unique acoustical properties. After a brief, tense standoff, she fired him, replacing him and his beloved analog board with a younger, more dynamic digital team. As he packed his few belongings, Arthur offered one last, quiet piece of advice to a smirking Miss Davies. "Be careful of the theater's hum," he said, his voice calm but heavy. "It doesn't like to be ignored." She scoffed, turning away before he had even left the stage door. Ms. Davies' first big production was a loud, flashy, modern musical, the perfect showcase for her new, crystal-clear, digital sound system. Opening night was a packed house. The overture began, the sound powerful, pristine, every note sharp and defined. But underneath the booming music and the soaring vocals, a new sound began to permeate the auditorium. Or rather, a feeling. It was the Orpheum hum, now unfiltered, unshackled. It was a very low-frequency vibration, not quite audible but physically felt, a subtle pressure in the chest, a faint thrumming in the bones, a building tension behind the eyes. To the new sound team, their diagnostics were perfect. Their equalizers showed a clean signal. But the hum wasn't on their standard readouts. It was simply there. The theater was breathing its secret dread into the room. Midway through the first act, the audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. A vague, sourceless anxiety began to spread through the crowd. Laughter at jokes died in people's throats. Applause was hesitant, weak. People couldn't identify the source of their discomfort. The music sounded fine, if a little sterile, but the underlying frequency was working its insidious magic on their subconscious, turning a night of entertainment into an exercise in mounting panic. People began to leave, first in trickles, then in a steady stream, complaining to ushers of sudden migraines, waves of nausea, or just a profound, urgent need to get out into the fresh air. The show was a catastrophic failure. The reviews were brutal. praising the talented performers but panning the theater itself, mentioning the unbearably oppressive atmosphere, inexplicable tension, and an evening that felt physically unwell. Davies was furious. She blamed the cast, the director, the script, anything but the sound system she had championed. Her new digital team ran every diagnostic imaginable. They found nothing. The hum remained, a ghost in their machine. Every subsequent show they mounted met the same fate. A sophisticated drama became unbearably tense. A light comedy played to a room filled with anxious, unlaughing patrons. The hum pervaded every performance, a great silent saboteur, turning every artistic endeavor into a psychological ordeal for its audience. Desperate and facing financial ruin, Davies was cleaning out an old storage closet backstage when she stumbled upon a box of Arthur Vance's old effects. Inside, she found his meticulously kept notebooks, filled with decades of handwritten charts, acoustic diagrams, and notes. And there, in a heavily annotated section, was his research on the Orpheum hum. He had charted its precise frequency, its resonant peaks, and detailed the complex, multi-layered analog filtering techniques he had invented to nullify it completely. She finally understood. His warning hadn't been the bitter rambling of a discarded employee. It had been a genuine piece of crucial, esoteric knowledge. She ordered her digital team to try and replicate his analog filtering techniques. They couldn't. Their sleek, modern systems were too perfect, too clean. They couldn't seem to isolate the organic, pervasive frequency that was woven into the room's very soul. It was as if the hum was now a sentient thing, actively evading their digital traps, refusing to be silenced by the very technology that had displaced its old keeper. Anya Davies's celebrated career at the Orpheum Grand was over. She resigned, her reputation for creating high-impact shows now a bitter, hollow irony. The Revenge of Arthur Vance was a masterclass in subtlety. His spirit didn't need to haunt the stage or flicker the lights. His profound knowledge, his unique, symbiotic bond with the theater's secret voice, became his instrument. By simply withdrawing his protective, skilled hand, he allowed the theater's own inherent, unsettling nature to reassert itself. The retribution wasn't in adding something horrific, but in unleashing a truth that had always been there, a frequency of dread that only its old, disgraced guardian had known how to silence. They say that the finest wines are not merely grown, but crafted with a piece of the vintner's very soul. They say the land remembers the touch of a caring hand, and that the grapes themselves can hold the memory of devotion. But what they don't often say is that when such a legacy is betrayed, the wine can remember that too, and its revenge can be the most bitter vintage of all. Crestfall Vineyard was a place of quiet reverence, nestled in a sun-dappled valley. For generations it was known for one legendary small-batch vintage, Sorrow's End. It was a wine spoken of in hushed, appreciative tones, renowned for a complex, almost ethereal taste that seemed to tell a story on the palate, a story of sun, soil, patience, and profound passion. Its creator was Old Man Anselm, the last of his line, a vintner who treated winemaking not as a business, but as a sacred partnership with the land. He poured his life, his very essence, into every bottle of Sorrow's End. When Anselm passed away, the vineyard and the celebrated name of its wine fell to his only heir, his nephew Marcus. Marcus was a man of a different vintage entirely. He was slick, pragmatic, and saw the world through the cold lens of a spreadsheet. He had no love for the art, no respect for the land. To him, Sorrow's End was not a legacy to be honored, but a brand to be exploited. His changes were immediate and brutal. He abandoned Anselm's meticulous, time-honored, organic methods, replacing them with cheaper, more aggressive agricultural practices. He sourced inferior grapes to supplement his own, prioritizing quantity over the uncompromising quality his uncle had cherished. He ramped up production, flooding the market with a thinly veiled imitation of the real thing, all bottled under the prestigious Sorrow's End label. The first few batches, buoyed by the wine's sterling reputation, sold briskly. Marcus counted his profits with a smug satisfaction. But then the whispers began, not from ghosts in the cellar, but from confused and disappointed connoisseurs. The wine, they reported, was wrong. It wasn't just that it lacked the sublime complexity of Anselm's vintages. Something more unsettling was afoot. Bottles, perfectly fine upon uncorking, seemed to spoil with an unnatural speed, turning within an hour from a passable table wine to something acrid and undrinkable. More disturbingly, a strange, persistent aftertaste was noted by nearly everyone who drank it. It wasn't the simple sourness of a wine gone bad. It was a profound, almost ashen bitterness, a flavor that clung to the palate long after the glass was empty, a taste that critics, struggling for words, described as the flavor of dust and disappointment, or like drinking a memory of a much better time. Then the phenomenon grew stranger, seeping from the palate into the psyche. People who drank Marcus's wine, even just a single glass with dinner, began to report experiencing intensely vivid, melancholic dreams that night. These were not nightmares of monsters or phantoms. They were quiet, personal torments. A businessman would dream of a brilliant opportunity he'd let slip through his fingers years ago. A woman would relive with painful clarity the moment a cherished friendship had ended due to her own pride. An artist would dream of their greatest unfinished masterpiece, forever beyond their reach. The wine, it seemed, was psychically imparting upon its drinkers the very essence of Anselm's own heartbreak, the sorrow of a life's work squandered, of beauty corrupted, of a legacy betrayed. The legend of Sorrow's End was reborn, but not as Marcus had intended. It became infamous, whispered about not in reverence, but in warning. It was now the wine of regret, the vintner's tears. Distributors began refusing his shipments. Restaurants sent back their cases. The vineyard, once a symbol of prestige, became a financial black hole, hemorrhaging money as its reputation turned to ash. Marcus, in a furious state of denial, refused to believe it. He blamed a conspiracy, sabotage, the mass hysteria of snobbish wine drinkers. To prove everyone wrong, he took a bottle from his latest, most expensive batch one evening, uncorked it, and drank a large glass himself. The initial taste was fine, if unremarkable. There was no immediate bitterness. He felt vindicated. He went to bed that night, his mind already drafting angry letters to his distributors. And then he dreamed. He didn't dream of his own failures. He dreamt of his uncle's. He saw through Anselm's eyes, feeling the old man's despair as he watched Marcus's machines tear through the cherished vines. He felt the crushing weight of a lifetime of devotion being carelessly, callously undone for profit. He tasted, not on his tongue, but in his very soul, the ashen bitterness of a broken heart. He awoke in a cold sweat, the phantom taste of profound sorrow filling his mouth, a taste he could not wash away for days. He was psychologically undone. The experience shattered his cynical pragmatism, forcing him to confront the emotional reality of his betrayal. The vineyard was no longer a source of potential profit, but a monument to his own greed and the quiet, powerful grief of the man he'd disrespected. Marcus sold Crestfall Vineyard for a pittance the following month, desperate to escape the place and its sorrowful vintage. The revenge of old man Anselm was complete. His spirit had not walked the fields as a spectre, nor had it rattled chains in the cellar. His love for his craft, his soul, was so deeply intertwined with the grapes, the soil, the very terroir of Crestfall, that when his legacy was betrayed, the wine itself became the vessel for his heartbreak. It didn't curse or kill. It simply, quietly, and effectively forced the world, and most pointedly his nephew, to taste the profound bitterness of what had been lost, enacting a perfect, poetic, and deeply personal justice.